But today, I am pleased to welcome Hannah Wetherill. Hannah she's got a fascinating career. She just published a book in April. It's her first novel. She began speaking on the power of the heroine's journey in the lives of both men and women. She is a summa cum laude graduate of NCSU and a former child abuse investigator. She was a UU for many years, and she now attends the Shakti, if I can get it out, Temple in Johnson City, Tennessee. Hannah, we're so happy to have you here today. Welcome.
Good morning. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you all so much for being here. Do we have any Star Wars fans here? I heard him mention Star Wars. Okay, good. I'm also a Star Wars fan. I will not spoiler, but I figure anyone who would run screaming from the room to avoid spoilers probably has already seen the movie at this point. So I'll put my water right here. But right about the time of the December release, a friend of mine put on Facebook a meme, and it kind of horrified me. And of course, the first thing I did was grab my phone and get swiping that little smartphone keyboard as fast as I could to kind of set the record straight. And it kind of inspired me. What it was a meme. Do you guys know what a meme is? It's one of those easily shareable photos, message combination, and they fill up your Facebook walls and your Twitter feeds and things. And this particular meme was a picture of a horde of Star Wars fans, and they were all decked out in their costumes. We're talking like a sea of Jedis and droids and a couple Boba Fetts. And framing these people who are really excited, and they're having this moment of kind of shared excitement and engagement, are the words, and I'm going to read it. If people can get this excited about a fictional movie, imagine what they could accomplish if they cared about things that actually mattered. And so when I read that, my heart kind of skittered my chest a little bit. My mouth went dry. And it's one of those moments I wanted to yell into the Facebook, no, not at all. But let me back up. I'm Hannah Wetherill. I published a fantasy novel under my pen name, H.K. Weather, this last year. So I've spent the last 5 years writing stories and reading stories and researching heroes and heroines. And these stories fascinate me. I'm not just entertained by stories of rogue FBI agents kind of investigating alien government conspiracies or medieval queens who are just trying to keep their heads on their necks. I feel called by these stories, but I think we all are. Our psyches require them. Our brains evolved to kind of understand life through stories. It's how our species passed crucial information down from one generation to the other through the long span of time between the dawn of man and must-see TV. So we make sense of mystery and loss and life and love through stories in a way that nonfiction just can't transmit that information. And a couple of people a few months ago all kind of forwarded me this article online, and it was about a therapist or a group of therapists that use fiction as therapy. They actually kind of prescribe a reading list of books. And there's one therapist in particular, her name is Janina Scarlett, and she does what she calls superhero therapy, where she works with people and she prescribes to them comic books and movies all about action heroes. And the Department of Defense has introduced something they call the theater of war, where they kind of help vets with PTSD by staging plays like Ajax and other things like that. And I could give you a dozen examples from Jesus to Buddha to Harry Potter to Luke Skywalker of the hero's journey, which is something that Joseph Campbell coined that term, hero's journey. It's a cycle and of myths. And Joseph Campbell said that the task of the hero is to shatter the established order. That's the point of the story. And he studied heroes from all over the world. And he said that these stories instruct us on how to live a full, authentic life. He taught us that the hero has to leave the world of the known to the unknown world. They have to go on a series of trials, and then they have to return with treasure to their community. But the real treasure that they always bring back is an enlightened self, because Joseph Campbell believed that a vitalized individual vitalizes their community. But he said less enlightened things about heroines, unfortunately. It was 1981, and Maureen Murdoch asked Joseph Campbell, what what's the difference between the heroine's journey and the hero's journey? And he says, oh, well, the heroine doesn't go on a journey. She's already there. She's the place the hero is getting to. And of course, the first time I read that, I cringed because Joseph Campbell is such a hero of mine, and I'm sure she cringed as well. So she started to study the heroine's journey, and she basically said the heroine also shatters an established order. But I think we can agree that for almost all of human history, we've had different orders to shatter. So even in the enlightened age that we live in now, we all have very different responsibilities and roles and expectations because of our gender. So heroines have to shatter the order with a capital O in a way that's different than heroes. And I'm not knocking a hero's journey at all. And if you guys ever want me to come back and talk about the hero's journey, I'd be happy to do that. But our culture is full of heroes and their stories, and it's full of groups who study the heroes and their stories. But it's harder to find stories about heroines in our culture, and it's even harder to find a mixed group of people who are willing to listen about heroines' stories, so I appreciate you all being here. So the last time I spoke about the heroine's journey in public, it was more the men who contacted me afterwards and said, I never really thought about that. And I actually see myself in the heroine's journey as well. And I have talked before about the heroine's journey and how it relates to women's representation in the media, but you guys have to beat the Baptist to brunch, so I'm going to hit the highlights and move on to that. So, yeah. So the idea that women's voices don't matter is so pervasive in our culture that a lot of times we don't even recognize it. But it's completely untrue, because women can be the soft bosom of the hearth, but we can be the warriors of justice, and we can be the creative force, and we can be the voice of fairness, and we're on the front lines of teaching all those things to the next generation with our male allies as well. But men have their own psychological, mythological, and spiritual needs, and so do we. So what I wanted to say specifically about women's representation in the media is that women's stories aren't being bought by publishing houses and by movie producers the way that men's stories are. And when Sony was hacked and their emails were released, it was very clear that the people who are creating these cultural touchstones see heteronormative white men and all the other things as two groups. So there was a lady named Alison Bechdel, and she and a friend developed what they call the Bechdel test. I don't know if any of you guys have heard about that. It takes a movie, and in order to pass, the movie has to have 3 criteria. The first is that the movie has to have 2 women in it, and that they have to speak to each other about something other than a man. That's all it has to do. That's it. So, sadly, they've compiled about 6,000 movies in a database online, and 42% have failed the test. And 10% didn't even pass the first criteria, didn't even have 2 female characters. And as I was writing this, there's a brand new study that came out that showed that Disney movies, those princess cartoon movies that our girls love, even when there's a female who has a starring role in that movie, she speaks the minority of lines in the movie, which is actually worse than when those movies first started in the 1930s. So even outside of Disney, linguists have found that in Academy Award nominee Best Actor movies, the actor spent in 2014 85 minutes on screen when he was the star, whereas women spent 57 minutes on screen even when they were the star of the movie. And in 2013, that was 100 minutes and 49 minutes. So women, even when they were the heroine, were getting about half the screen time. And Philippa Gregory, who is a novelist who she's mostly known for her Tudors Queen novels and her Cousins War novels. She writes that the women that she finds so fascinating were afterthoughts for historians for about 500 years. So no matter what their station, and no matter the fact that these women had a front seat to some of the biggest events in English history, they are basically invisible in the historical record. And she thinks it's because women weren't allowed to write their own history. They weren't allowed to study history. And until recently, they weren't educated enough to be able to read it, let alone debate it. So for about 500 years, these stories have been through the filter of male historians and male scholars. And what you find is that the stories have been reduced to either a woman who has given birth to a man who's really great, or she was this dastardly, conniving woman of ill repute. Everything else was kind of considered uninteresting. So, on that note, ladies, I have something to tell you. Your voices are shrill, and also your bodies are all wrong. And they're not just all wrong, they offend God himself. But luckily, I have a product to sell you that will clear all that up for the low introductory price of your soul. And this is sad because you're really too old to be relevant unless you're too young and inexperienced to have any knowledge. So this is the order that we have to shatter as heroines. And we do that by bringing our perspectives into the world, by being women with agency. So grown women do grown women things, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book. I wanted to write about a grown woman doing grown woman things. There was a novelist named Chuck Wendig, and he defines agency, I don't know if you've heard of this word, agency, as the character's ability to make decisions that affect the story. And it seems like it should be a given, but it's not, unfortunately. These are fully formed characters with their own desires and needs. They push on the story and drive it forward. They're not damsels in distress, and they haven't been hurt, and they don't need to have their honor avenged. So in my story, something really terrible has happened to the main character before the book even begins, and the male lead wants to save her. He wants to make everything okay, but he can't fix it because she's not a plot device in his story, although she could have been. So agency gives the heroine choice. She is sexual and not sexualized. She can be courageous when things are scary, and she can be unlikable, and she can be charming. She can be all of the things that society tells us a woman can be and can't be. Because what makes a heroine great is not that she can fight, but that she chooses to fight. It's the choice that gives her agency. And the same thing goes for real women. In order for our work to be noble, we have to be able to choose it as well. So back to the heroine's journey. Like the hero's journey, when you follow your own journey, whether you're a man or a woman, you're doing three things. The first of all, you're defying convention. And the second thing is you're learning to love in a completely different way. And third of all, you're creating a destiny for yourself. So I'm going to tell you a story first. I'm going to have a drink of water. Has anyone heard of the story of Psyche and Eros? It's an old Greek myth. Okay. So it's foretold that Psyche will marry a monster. And she is whisked away to this giant castle in the mountains. And the stranger has told her, I will take care of everything. There is no need to quest. There is no need to find yourself. I will provide for you. But she is curious, and she does the one thing he's told her she cannot do. She looks at him. And he is so disgusted by her disobedience, he runs off to his mama's house. He's done with her and abandons her. And his mother, of course, is Aphrodite, the goddess of love. But when Psyche looked at him, he was so beautiful, being a god, she stumbles and she falls into one of his arrows, and he's Cupid. So now she's in love. But for Psyche, it's either love or it's death by her own hand. There is no other choice. So she asks for Aphrodite's help, and Aphrodite doesn't think she's good enough for her son anyway. So she sets up these impossible trials for her to do. And Psyche is spunky. And some versions of the story, Eros himself appreciates that spunk, and he begins to help her by shape-shifting into things like ants or reeds. And she has to do these really dangerous, difficult tasks. And these tasks teach her different things. She learns important lessons for womanhood, such as discernment, or the danger of unchecked power, how to set good boundaries, and how to worry about only one part of your life at a time and not worry about the future. She travels down to the goddess of the dead, Persephone, and when she emerges back, she emerges as a whole person able to love maturely. At that point, they whisk her away to Mount Olympus, and she is deified. She suddenly becomes Eros' equal. They fall in love and marry, and they produce a child named Bliss. And the story of Psyche teaches us that for a woman to be able to love maturely, she has to leave the state of expectancy. She is not a passive vessel. She is not Sleeping Beauty. She is not Snow White with a piece of apple stuck in her throat. Psyche no longer expects a man to come rescue her and take care of her. And by reading this story, we ourselves can see that our partners have to be imperfect and that they fail and that they grieve. So I'm going to take a hard turn. I'm going to read a small snippet of my novel. There was a dark, leaden weight where her heart used to be, and it was pulling her to the center of the earth. She wanted to let go and stop fighting gravity, to plummet to the floor. Every day, she showered and dressed and was on time for work. She forced herself to apply mascara and a little bit of blush. It kept people off her back. Noelle was just going through the motions. When her chest felt tight, her chin went up. She lied, telling a booth of rude, Rolex-sporting tourists from New York that the pecan pie was vegan. And as she lied for just a moment, normal crept back into her voice. Normal. It shocked her and left her ashamed. The cloud of grief wasn't absent, really, but it had rolled back for one brief moment. Its retreat shook her. She had grown used to its company. So now I'm going to tell you the story of the goddess Inanna. So Inanna was the great goddess, the great Sumerian goddess. She was considered the god of love and lust and war. She was a big character. They called her the bright star of the heavens. So she has a sister, Ereshkigal, who is the queen of the underworld, and Ereshkigal's husband has died. So Inanna wants to go down to the underworld and pay her respects. So she gets to the first of 7 gates, and she says that she wants to come in. And Ereshkigal is so angry at her loss. She says, that's fine, you can come in, but you have to pass through the same way everybody else comes in. So she goes to the 7 gates, and as she goes through, she is stripped of something. The first time she's stripped of her crown, and then her hair, and then her garments, until she has nothing left but her blood, and they take that too. I'm going to read from the myth. It says, the judges of the underworld surrounded her, and they passed judgment against her. And then Ereshkigal fashioned the eye of on Inanna, the eye of death, and she spoke against her the word of wrath, and she uttered against her the cry of guilt, and she struck her. And Inanna was turned into a corpse, a piece of rotting meat, and was hung from a hook on the wall. But luckily, Inanna has a failsafe. She has told her servant that if she is not returned from the underworld in 3 days, to come get help. So her servant goes to all the different father gods asking for help, and they're all extremely busy and cannot help her, until they finally reach Enki, the god of water and wisdom, and he agrees to help. So what he does is he fashions from the mud underneath his fingernails these genderless beings that have one purpose. All they do is grieve. And so they go to the underworld, and they weep and they wail with Ereshkigal. And she is so grateful for that empathy that she grants them one wish. And of course their wish is the corpse of Inanna. But the underworld is tricky. You can't just leave an empty space. She has to send back a substitute. And when she returns to the underworld, she realizes that her consort, Dumuzi, the shepherd god, hasn't grieved her at all. In fact, he's taken her throne and been ruling in her place. So she sends him to the underworld. She's pretty mad. But eventually she cools down, and his sister, who is just beside herself with grief, says, please let me go in my brother's place. And Inanna, knowing that that won't work either, agrees to let them each take turns 6 months in the underworld, 6 months out. So I'm sure you're like, cool story, what does that have to do with anything? Well, the hero's journey is linear, but the heroine's journey is spiral. She is already on her heroic road of trials before she even descends. She's successful. She's the bright star of heaven. She is the goddess who is succeeding. But her path has just begun. She has to meet the dark goddess, and she has to reconcile her feminine self and then her masculine self. So let's look at the modern woman, okay? She starts out in the right path. She separates from the feminine because society doesn't value femininity unless it fits this really rigid, almost impossible ideal. I mean, for instance, in the new Star Wars movie, Rey is the main character of the movie. She's kind of the point. But go to the Target toy section, you will not find a toy of her in there. I know, I've looked. And there's a nationwide conversation about the fact that she is not represented in those packs of action figures, but she's still not represented, even though we've been having that conversation. Got off on a tangent there. So our modern heroine hustles for worth in a man's world. She identifies with success. She wants to be valuable. She wants to be successful. So she gets her degree, or she establishes a career, or she learns a trade, or she finds a really great husband and has a couple babies. Whatever it is, she's a success, right? She has won it all. But she feels empty and dry and worn down and tired and maxed out. She can't meet the Pinterest ideal of breaking the glass ceiling and being the exception that proves the rule, because she was busting her butt when she was pregnant, and now she's pumping breast milk in a dirty bathroom somewhere. Or maybe she's finally walked off the stage with her law degree in her hand, and the first thing her grandmother says is, "Tick-tock, your eggs are getting old. When are you getting married?" Or maybe she's schlepping the kids to soccer and piano and Mandarin classes and keeping fit in the gym, and she has a nice house with updated faucets and shiplap and subway tile, like on Fixer Upper. But she breaks, and she goes to that dark place of the soul, the place that she's been avoiding all this time that's succeeding so damn hard. And she walks off the field. She has to descend the dark goddess. And the dark goddess is the destructive, devouring goddess. She is, quote, the one who is naked and walks on bones. She is the flaming one, the mother of the dead, and the terrible one. And she cleanses by fire. She strips from you everything that you have succeeded, all of your accolades, all of the labels, all the things that you thought were meaningful. And this is where I want to put my emphasis, because this is the whole point of the heroine's journey. You cannot have Inanna, the bright star of the heavens, without her sister Rishkagal, the goddess of the underworld. You can't have them unless they're together. And cultures all over the world have these goddesses. And there's a Hindu goddess, and I cannot pronounce the name, but the name literally means never not broken. And her power lies in the fact that she is in flux. She is an imperfect being, and she is raw. So what does that teach the modern heroine? Well, you have to take the mean, evil, crazy stepmother of the fairy tales, and you have to take her out of the box, and you have to sit her down in front, and you have to look her in the eye, and you have to say, "Why are you so angry? Where is your damage?" And you have to give her the big piece of chicken. And you have to listen to what she has to say. And your friends won't like it, and your spouse won't like it. And they'll tell you to smile and to medicate and just work out harder. But you can't, because the heroine's journey is you have to go to the darkness whether or not it's convenient for you or anybody else. And when you come back, you have reconnected with your feminine, and you've reincorporated your masculine self, and you learn to be instead of do. And you silence your inner tyrant, and you get, for the first time, accepting your body. Because your body is intelligent, and it has been sending you messages, and you haven't been listening. So when you fall into these stories of women with agency, you see that in this black and white world that we live in, where you either succeed or you fail, because there are a lot of people making money off the idea that you either succeed or fail, and that you can't succeed. When you just give that up and you walk off the field, you can become a juicy green creator. You can become the goddess of fertility. You become the myth maker and part of the myth, because you have hard-worn battle scars, because you are the preserver and the creator and the destroyer, all those things that the goddess can be. But the most important thing is you stop being the great pretender, because once you stop pretending that you're perfect, you're free. So I could stand here all day and tell you stories about modern heroines or ancient heroines. I really appreciate you guys giving me the chance to do that, because it means a lot to me. And there are some amazing heroines like Buffy or Scully or Furiosa or Rey. And I don't want people to think that those stories are a waste of time. Sometimes I think they're the only thing that'll help. Thank you so much.